Welcome to Podcast Pediatricians. I'm Matt Gotthold.
And I'm Rob Walter.
In this episode, we will explore the depths of strep throat. So we will go gagging deeply into the abyss that is strep throat. Is that what kids do when you go to do their throat culture sometimes?
No.
Oh, not only do the kids do it, but there's this empathetic gag from the mom oftentimes from across the room.
I do think I hate it too. I feel bad for them.
Oh, come on. No way.
I do it fast.
So Strep pyogenes, also known as Group A Strep, is the source of many a disease across humanity. But before we get too deeply into this episode, let's remind you that we are available on iTunes, Google Play, TuneIn, and Stitcher for your downloading pleasure. And please remind your friends and family that they could benefit from our twisted take on pediatrics.
Right. Ask them to listen, to download. We're not making any money, and that's fine. We like doing it, but the more downloads, the more we get the message that people are listening. Our disclaimer, we are sharing our own personal opinions on pediatric care. Always talk to your own pediatric caregiver about your child. Pediatric caregivers should always consult expert guidelines and consider their own community's standard of care. Now, before we leap off, I was just talking to Matt. It's the end of the week here, and this has been the most exhausting week. It's like there is this anxiety epidemic the last few weeks, and especially this week. I mean, everybody, there's also some depression with it, but like last year seemed to be the year of concussion. This year seems to be the year of anxiety. I don't know if it's social media and the political climate since January, global warming, or maybe it's me.
Yeah, I see a little of it. And you're seeing this in your patients?
Yes, my patients.
Well, I'd be anxious too if I was a patient of yours. They've got their own worries.
You know, maybe like when I'm your pediatrician, it makes you anxious and sad.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Just room to room, well visits. How you doing? I'm really anxious.
Now I'm bad.
And they're not even slated for extra time in the office. And there's some pediatricians who will say, this is something that's really important. I want to give it enough time, so I'll have you come back. But when I have them in the room, and a teenager's admitting to being anxious or depressed, I think it's really hard to say, okay, let's see you next week and talk about it. Right. Which just means everything gets backed up. It's always been a struggle for me to figure out what to do.
Well, like so many other things that we need to confront kind of spontaneously in our offices, it's a bit of a dance. I mean, in a pretty remarkably quick fashion, we need to decide just how urgent something is based on the facts that we have. I have definitely seen the trend upward over the last several months, much of it having to do with the end of school year, upcoming summers, expectations, etc. I can't say that last week was a particularly bad week. I actually had yesterday off.
Well, it was a brutal week for me. Anyway, I digress.
So let's continue our discussion here. So pharyngitis is one of the most common reasons for which children and young adults seek medical care. And Group A Strep, also referred to as GAS, although I'm not going to do that today, is the most frequent cause of bacterial pharyngitis in these age groups. Perhaps in future episodes, we'll delve into some other manifestations, but for today, we will be sticking with the typical strep throat.
Right. This is our bread and butter, probably right after earaches, which we'll also delve into. It's sore throats. And even after all these years, it's really vexing in a lot of ways. And it's one of the times when we try to do evidence-based medicine, but sometimes with sore throats and strep, it's hard to do, as we'll detail now.
Yeah, and we'll also review the mysteries in the dark corners of the strep carrier state, which seems to have so much mystique surrounding it. It's something that I find myself continuing to look up every couple of years just to make sure that I'm updated on the thought processes of the infectious disease experts on this one. But I think we have this down today as well. So strep pyogenes has been part of our world for many centuries. Modern science knows much about it, but not everything. Infections with this organism come in a very wide panorama. Some would argue a wider range of clinical illness types of this bacteria than any other microorganism.
Except maybe Epstein-Barr virus. That's the one that we'll talk in the future, but that can have a million ways it can present.
Exactly, yeah. That and what is it, syphilis, I guess, are the great imitators. We never see this in pediatrics, at least not in Delaware.
I think it's just experience. I think if you grow up in Jersey, you have to know about syphilis. And most of the other Rest of the country does not.
You're going to have all of South Jersey knocking on your door someday, buddy, with
I hope so.
Cudgels and torches. Can you tell I'm reading Les Miserables right now? They're going to come after you with pitchforks.
As long as they don't hate me in Ocean City and in Stone Harbor.
That's where you want to hang, huh?
Yes.
All right. So illnesses due to Group A strep span the whole gamut, from sore throats and skin infections to puerperal fever and necrotizing fasciitis. Strep pyogenes is also responsible for some post-infectious conditions, most notably rheumatic fever and acute glomerulonephritis. Say that 3 times fast. Were there any words in medicine that you had to struggle with really kind of getting the cadence of when you were in med school?
Syphilis.
In recent decades, the syndromes of streptococcal toxic shock and pediatric autoimmune neuropsychiatric disorders associated with streptococcal infections, also known as PANDAS, have become intriguing topics of conversation for those in the medical field.
Yeah, especially PANDAS. There's a whole center called the Autoimmune Post-Infectious Brain Conditions at the University of Arizona, and we could spend a whole podcast on PANDAS,
and maybe
but we never will.
Oh, come on.
Nope, I'm not doing it.
I'd like a good controversy, man.
No.
Oh, there's some fascinating stuff out there right now.
PANDAS.
But anyway, Group A strep remains one of the top 10 causes of mortality from infectious disease in the world. And who knew? What we think of as an annoyance. From a historical perspective, there have been incredible reductions in Group A strep infection rates in modern times. This is felt to be due to broad improvements in social and economic conditions. Yet Group A strep continues to be a leading cause of infectious disease globally, with more than 18 million people affected by serious Group A strep diseases. Group A strep is a leading cause of illness and death in children and young adults, particularly those with few resources.
Quick quiz. This is when I was a young attending, I always gave this single question to the residents that there are 4 main causes of acute exudative pharyngitis in mostly teenagers and older children. Name the 4.
Ooh, okay. So we've got strep.
Group A strep.
We've got mono.
EBV
mono. We have gonorrhea.
See, that's the one you got. But again, going from your background, because most people forget about gonorrhea, except whatever. And then the 4th, the virus.
The 4th. Exudative, really?
Yep.
Does adenovirus cause an exudate?
You got it. Bing, bing, bing. But there now is a 5th. And so later in this podcast, we'll talk about the 5th kind of common cause.
All right. So historically, strep infection was first described by the Austrian surgeon Theodor Billeroth in 1874. He was investigating the organism as a source of erysipelas and wound infections, and describes small organisms found either isolated or arranged in pairs, sometimes in chains of 4 or 20. Actually, 4 to 20 or more links. So the term strepto means a chain, and it was used along with the term coccus, meaning a bury.
Did you like microbiology in med school?
I actually did like microbiology.
Really?
Yeah. It was something I got. Like, I understood it. You could look in the microscope. It was a different world. It was kind of cool, actually.
I did not. No, you had to do those Giemsa stains, right stains. My hands got stained.
I thought that stuff was cool.
I always got it on my shirt.
You don't like to get your hands dirty,
It was kind of smelly. No, it just wasn't. I wasn't a microbio. My eyes are kind of close together, so it was really hard in the microscope to make it fit right.
All right. So in 1879, Louis Pasteur isolated this organism from the blood and uteruses of women with puerperal fever and demonstrated that it was the causative agent for these disease processes.
Do you remember Dr. Meggs we talked about episodes ago from Jefferson, Dr. Mooter's colleague, who didn't believe in obstetrical anesthesia and did not believe that hands could transmit disease?
Ah, yes.
So he never, ever, as a rule, washed his hands between patients. And many, many of his young moms died of puerperal fever. So Jefferson proud.
Woohoo! Go Jeff. In 1884, Friedrich Julius Rosenbach examined bacteria from suppurative for you non-medical people out there means pus-like, lesions, and declared the species to be named Streptococcus pyogenes. So pyo means pus, and genes means forming. So if we break it all down, between the previous description and this one, it comes down to Streptococcus pyogenes means pus-forming bury chains. Could be a new ice cream.
It is. Ben & Jerry's makes a pus-forming berry chain flavor. It's a little bit tangy.
It's only seasonal.
Yes, it is. Only in May.
Yeah. Streptococcus has been extremely important throughout medical history. As summarized by a strep historian, Dr. Schwartz, so this is a direct quote, "Not only were streptococci among the first organisms to be presumed to be the cause of contagious diseases, but also their existence forced the introduction of hygiene and asepsis into hospital wards.
Hallelujah.
Good stuff. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about the old strep. Streptococcus pyogenes possesses a wide array of weapons and defenses which permit it to dodge our immune responses. It's also adaptable in a variety of host environments. These characteristics permit strep pyogenes to initiate and perpetuate both local and invasive diseases like pharyngitis and impetigo.
Infant tigers to you and I.
Infant tigers, that's right. Cellulitis, necrotizing fasciitis, and strep toxic shock syndrome. Some strep strains are nephritogenic, which means that they can be harmful to the kidneys. Non-Group A streps have no defined virulence factors. So there's no known environmental reservoir or animal host for strep pyogenes besides humans. So it's a distinctly human disease.
Right. And so it doesn't come from your dog.
No.
There was a paper, and I remember it's 1983 when we were both starting to train, from the postgraduate medicine that described a family with recurrent strep, and they finally cultured the dog, and they said it was Group A strep.
Yes.
And they said, well, if you keep having the family, culture the dog, give antibiotics. That paper's been totally discredited. that dog probably had Group G strep. So don't culture your dog.
No.
And don't give antibiotics to your dog.
Right.
And don't blame your dog. But I hear this. I keep hearing this over and over again. Maybe it's the dog.
Did you ever have somebody culture their dog?
Yes.
I did too when I first went into practice, because this was the mindset under which we grew up. From a microbiology standpoint, we were told that there could be other sources of strep, especially in a carrier state. And it could be the family mutt.
Right.
So,
never the cat, because no one wants to mess with their cat.
Would you?
No.
No.
I wouldn't have
a
cat. Cat's the other white meat. That's really bad.
You sound like my wife. She can't stand cats either.
I'm sorry.
So just to get back to it, so since there's no known environmental reservoir or animal host for strep besides us, direct or indirect contact with an infected person is the source of human infection. Transmission is mostly from large droplets of respiratory secretions, although spread through contaminated objects and food are also well-described alternate routes of transmission.
Like your toothbrush.
Toothbrush is exactly right. Pharyngitis or sore throats, the most common consequence of infection with strep. Sore throats very frequently the presenting complaint at medical offices, and infection with strep pyogenes is diagnosed in 20 to 40% of sore throats in children and in 5 to 15% of adults, unlike the diagnosis rate apparently at the medical aid units, which seems to hover around 100%. The peak incidence of strep pharyngitis is in children 5 to 15 years old, and infections more common during the winter and spring in temperate climates, although we do see it off and on year-round.
Right, although March, April seems to be the streppy months. Get around March, April, starts to get a little warmer, like, there comes
here we go. A little bout of this. Yep. Do you know anybody famous who died of strep?
The one I remember is Jim Henson. The
Henson.
Muppet guy.
Yeah. What was it? It was like a strep toxic shock for him,
or
right?
strep pneumonia. We should know that. I don't remember, but I remember it made the headlines like Jim Henson dies of strep, and everybody thinks, the late people think of strep as this benign thing. And it was, when you get invasive strep, it is horrific.
Aside from his creation of Elmo, we miss Jim.
We did. He was a genius.
But not Elmo. Mozart, originally thought to have been killed by Salieri. Did you see the movie?
I did. I love that movie.
Yeah, a wonderful movie. Is now thought by many to have died from strep. There was actually an article in the 2009 of the Annals of Internal Medicine going through that, to the point where he apparently became bloated. People wondered whether he had a glomerulonephritis in addition to all the other aches and pains he had. And a very interesting article. Oh, rock me, Amadeus. Who sang that?
Rock me, Amadeus. Amadeus. I have no idea.
You know what? I put this in our little script to try to trip you up, and then I forgot to look it up. So next episode we will.
Wait, I'm going to look it up.
Go ahead, you look it up. This is the beauty of Google.
And it's Falco.
Falco, yes, another one-hit wonder.
Edie Falco from The Sopranos sang that song.
Rock me up.
All right. If you bring that up, we got to go down this wormhole here. So
okay. There are a lot of wormholes in this episode.
Who starred in Amadeus the movie? Besides, what's his name? F. Murray Abrams. No, the other guy.
Yeah.
Who played Mozart?
Tom, and I can never pronounce his correct name.
Hulce or Hulce? Hulce.
Yeah, it's
Tom
Hulce. And he was amazing.
What's his other famous role?
He was in Animal House.
Pinto.
Larry Kroger. Pinto Flounder. Was it Flounder? Was Pinto's foil? The big guy?
Right. So Flounder, Kent Dorfman, known as Flounder. And Kent Dorfman Flounder was also in another favorite of ours, where he played Elliot Axelrod, the medical student.
Oh, yes. Awesome. He was indeed a St. Elsewhere alum.
In St. Elsewhere.
Yeah.
He also evidently was in Babylon 5, but I didn't watch that. But as I thought about this, I found out or just realized that he died this week. Stephen Furst died from complications of diabetes. This week. I also looked it up and saw that he was killed off on season 6 of St. Elsewhere. I don't remember what happened, but
what was it that Dean Wormer said to him in Animal House?
Dean Wormer said something about living.
No, drunk and stupid is no way to go through life, boy. Something like that. That's a paraphrase.
Is that right before he threw up on his desk? Yeah,
I think so.
Anyway, a salute to Stephen Furst.
Big ups.
Elliot Axelrod and Flounder. He was great. And lastly, since you mentioned Rock Me Amadeus, a related song that I liked much better was Eat Me I'm a Danish. Do you remember that? Eat Me I'm a Danish.
Is that the Weird Al?
Eat Me You would think it was Weird Al.
Yeah, because I'm not a Weird Al fan.
It was actually Kenny Hollywood. So
never heard of him.
One-hit wonder, but you're not a Weird Al fan?
No, not even in the least.
Weird
Al is the antithesis of no.
All right, how about my favorite Weird Al besides
Life's Too Short to listen to Weird Al.
Pretty Fly for a Rabbi, but how about the This American Pie Star Wars Weird Al?
No.
Bye. Maybe Vader someday later.
Rather jam an ice pick into my temple.
All right.
All right, let's move on. Let's get back to the science.
Really digress there.
So the clinical features of a strep infection. The classic presentation of streptococcal pharyngitis starts with an abrupt onset of fever, fatigue, and sore throat. There's usually painless swallowing and often swollen and tender anterior cervical lymph nodes. So they're the lymph nodes that are right under your jawline on each side. Abdominal pain and vomiting are common, especially in younger children. Why is that, Rob Walter?
I'm not sure, although less often the vomiting, but definitely the abdominal pain.
Yes.
Do you know why?
I think that I was told at least at one point, and I can't verify this with any research paper.
No one can verify anything that Matt thinks is not verifiable.
At least it's not certifiable. My understanding is that the bacterium actually will bind to protein receptors in the stomach and cause discomfort and potential vomiting. That's at least what I was taught by somebody, although I can't access the resource right now. But anyway, makes sense to me. Yep. Makes sense to me. Cough, runny nose, hoarseness, conjunctival irritation, and diarrhea are notably absent in strep pharyngitis, and we'll get back to that in a bit. And the presence of these symptoms should suggest a non-streptococcal, usually a viral etiology.
And so don't culture them on the whole.
You can stay away from culturing those folks. Although that's always, oftentimes the parent has brought them in specifically to be cultured.
Yeah, we'll get to that. That's the conundrum of trying to balance
tough one.
that.
Very tough one. We will approach that that dicey subject shortly. Physical findings generally include a fever, oftentimes greater than 39 degrees Celsius, which is about what, Robert?
39 Celsius, about 102.5?
Ish, I think. I always remember that 40 is 104.
Right.
Like the 4 and the 104. Right. That gives me some grounding there, an anchor. An erythema, an edema of the tonsils and the posterior pharynx. The tonsils may be covered with a patchy white or yellowish exudate. And petechiae, small little blood spots, may be present on the soft palate.
And if you see ulcers or vesicles in the throat,
it ain't strep.
Never culture those.
Don't
I really stick to that.
Don't do it. Anterior cervical lymph nodes typically are enlarged and tense and tender to touch. The presence of almost all of these characteristic clinical features suggests, but doesn't specifically tell us, that this could be strep pharyngitis.
You didn't mention the one other thing, which maybe it's not in the books, is the smell of strep.
Ooh, yeah.
Just got that foul smell, like you're looking at it, and then you get that whiff. You said, "Oh yeah, this is not 100%, but probably going to be smell." But it doesn't smell like napalm in the morning.
No,
but it smells bad.
No, it does, and in fact, it's not like it's not like nasty poopy smell. It's more along the lines of almost like excessive staleness. I mean, it really it has a classic odor that we who have done this for a while can kind of sniff right out. Nonetheless, we still test for it, and we'll get to that in a second. Without treatment, strep throat usually runs its course in 3 to 6 days, and the fever subsides within a week. Regardless of the disappearance of the symptoms, though, throat cultures taken afterwards oftentimes remain positive for up to several weeks if antibiotics haven't been given.
And also the incubation period for strep, which is the time from when you first get exposed to it and then when you first get symptoms, is really short. It's only 2 to 4 days.
Right.
So if mom had strep 2 weeks ago and then little Johnny's in with a sore throat, he may have strep, but it's not from mom.
Right. I've never asked you this, but will you routinely treat multiple members of a family if one came in to see you and was positive for strep and they call you 2 days later and now, the other little guy or little gal has it?
So two parts of it. One is if someone has classic strep and then you have a sibling who's in the right age range, and for some of my moms, I'll show them what the strep looks like, and if it has a sudden onset, and especially if you see pus, I will sometimes do that. I think it's reasonable within the setting of a medical home to do that. What I rarely have done is when you keep getting strep back and forth.
Right.
I know they talk about treating the whole family for strep. I really don't get into that very much.
No, I don't know that I've ever done it. If I have, it certainly has been under exceptional circumstances. But I'll usually tell people if the other members of the family, meaning the children, because I really don't like to treat adults, come down with similar symptoms over the next, I say, 2 to 5 days, and there don't seem to be any other complications to the situation, meaning it's otherwise a healthy child, they don't have any underlying issues I have to be concerned about, and it's a pretty straightforward presentation, that I am indeed willing to call in an antibiotic for them if they are 3 and older, and not, as Rob mentioned, 2 weeks later, just within that 2 to 5 day timeline.
Right.
So regardless of the fact that strep seems overtly to be strep and it's pretty straightforward to the general population, there are certainly a lot of other illnesses out there that can look exactly the same. So infectious mono, caused by Epstein-Barr virus, can have a very similar clinical appearance. And so can infection with adenovirus, as Rob just mentioned, and some other respiratory viruses.
You know, in getting to the mono part, and certainly when I first started thinking, is it mono or not mono, over the years, I've had quite a few patients who have had both.
Yes.
I will look at it and look at the history, look at the age, and say, I think this is probably going to be mono. And then do the culture, it's positive, but I still think it's going to be mono.
Right.
And even to the point where sometimes I will send them to get the mono test after I start the antibiotic. And the antibiotic I start will not be amoxicillin because you can get this weird reaction and rash when you have EBV and amoxicillin. And when I'm pretty confident it might be both, I want to do that because the one thing we can do for mono kids when they're really uncomfortable, if we know it's mono, is put them on steroids. And I don't want to do that for strep. So a couple times a year, especially when they come in, my boyfriend has mono, everybody has mono. Otherwise, then you finish the strep, they're still uncomfortable, and they come back again. So I don't know if you've had that.
For sure. I mean, and in fact, I think statistically about 10% of people with mono also have a concomitant strep infection. Look that up, man. Do your research, Rob.
Okay.
Yeah. And we will absolutely have an episode on mono or Epstein-Barr virus in the future, and we will definitely talk about the role of steroids there because you and I may or may not be on the same page there. Shocker.
Which means we're not.
That's right.
Okay, so after the break, we'll be right back.
Oh my, this here Anakin guy. Maybe Vader someday later, now he's just a small
Welcome
fry.
back. We're going to give some pearls and faux pas, and Matt can mock them as we go along. So I'm going to start with
neither.
I'm going to start with a faux pas, then I'm going to throw out a whole thing of pearls that have just been rattling around my brain. As a third-year senior
There's
resident,
a lot of room in there.
as a third-year senior resident at Evanston Hospital in Illinois, I went into a room with a new mom who had breast tenderness and a strange yellow discharge from her nipples. And I looked at that. I immediately went to the nurses' station. There were 3 nurses there. And I said to them, I think this mom has a breast abscess. And they smiled and they said, we'll come right in, doctor. And they followed me in. And while I was sitting there, they said to the mom that this yellow discharge was normal colostrum. And then they summoned me out of the room, and then they all started cracking up. And I was mortified. And by the next morning, everybody at Evanston Hospital knew about the story. And I was the senior resident. I wasn't just like an intern. I was a senior resident. So that was my faux pas. It shows how much I knew about breastfeeding. That's why I have a lactation consultant in my office.
But it's funny. I can remember those days when the nurses would make it very clear when they said to you, yes, doctor, no, doctor. They were half doing it tongue in cheek, like
Exactly.
you might have an MD, buddy, but
Right.
I can run rings around you in terms of what's going on here.
I use that term doctor
That's
loosely.
right.
And the other thing, do you remember in the day that the person who like controlled everything was the charge nurse?
Oh, yes.
I mean, if you were on your charge nurse's bad side, things weren't done.
No, if you could get the charge nurse and the unit clerk both, to be your friends, you were golden.
And you got to sleep at night because they wouldn't bother you.
Absolutely.
All right, some pearls. I know some that Matt feels strongly about. Rattling around. I'm not sure how much I talked about it before, but I'm going to talk about it again. That when you walk into a room and greet your families, in this day and age, knowing about disease transmission, you shouldn't shake hands with them. You should do the fist bump and then blow it up. They love the fist bump. They blow it up. And if any of you have seen Big Hero 6, which I've not seen, but I've watched it on YouTube and my patients taught me, you give a fist pump, and then as you pull back, you go, ba-la-la-la-la-la-la-la. Oh, it's just a winner every time.
Gosh, Rob, I couldn't disagree more. Ay, ay, ay. Are you kidding me? If somebody walked in the room and did that to me, if I didn't throttle them, I'd kick them really hard in the shins.
You just go in there and spread your streppy hands
I
by
sure
giving
do.
big handshakes.
Well, first of all, in my practice, we wash our hands, and then we follow that oftentimes with using antibacterial solution, which we keep in every corner of the office.
Yeah, but it's not perfect.
So,
I'd rather.
Gosh, you don't shake hands. That's
I occasionally
not even
do,
American.
But I've changed over to the fist bump, and kids like it, and it's more hygienic.
No wonder I've been getting so many transfers in from your practice. So what brings you to the office? Well, our creepy other pediatrician used to fist bump me all the time. Ay, ay, ay.
Okay. I knew that you would jump on that. Okay, number 2 is that I'm saying to everybody, if their kids have a smartphone, and we'll talk in the future about what age that might be appropriate, but that it always gets charged in the kitchen. It never gets charged in the bedroom. And the first thing the kid will say to you is, but it's my alarm clock. And then you just say, so go to Five Below and buy an alarm clock. But there's no reason to have that screen in the room. They're all on Instagram. They're all on Snapchat. They're not on Facebook because that's for old people. Many are on Twitter. And it's just hard to disconnect. And we're seeing so much anxiety and such. And I think it's part of it. I made that kind of a blanket rule. They don't always follow it. But I don't know if you address that. But it's been my thing for the past few months.
No, I probably should address it because it's the kind of advice that I give to people once they actually come to me with problems, with sleep issues, with anxiety, is that there really is this tremendous need for us to be able to disconnect from the whole electronic world, at least be able to fall asleep with clearer thoughts than whatever, Betty was wearing to prom.
Who's named Betty anymore? Is it the Archies?
I don't know. You always say baby Hannah or something.
Yeah, well, that's a regular normal name these days, not Betty.
That's why I used it.
Okay, one more. The HPV vaccine, and that's a vaccine that's fraught with a lot of, I think, misinformation, but we know it stings a little bit when going in. We know that we want to watch them for a few minutes and maybe give them something to eat or drink so they don't stand up and faint, especially those kids who don't have breakfast. So we've gotten in the habit of giving that vaccine when the visit starts. The nurse comes in the beginning, and by the time it's done, it's over. They can walk out. They don't have to wait anymore. Right. I don't know if you do that. It's a little thing, but it really makes sense.
We do it as often as it seems appropriate. Sometimes as we're suggesting the HPV vaccine, it still deserves a little bit more conversation toward the end of the visit, and so we don't do it exclusively. Right. But when we have the opportunity and my nurses pick up on it, which they're sharp and they generally do, oftentimes we will give it at the very beginning of the visit.
And certainly the follow-up ones where you don't have to go through the convincing. It's easy to get it done. And then do you ever use Buzzy? Buzzy is this
Only to cut my
device
hair.
that goes over the arm that comes with separate ice packs that you put in the freezer and then you slip in there and you put it around the arm and it vibrates parts of the arm, makes it cold so they don't really feel the shot as much. And certainly with kids who are needle phobic, just knowing it's there, it's not perfect, but it really does take a lot of the sting away. And it's just a few bucks. It's called Buzzy.
Buzzy. Why isn't it called Icy?
Don't know. Okay, here's another. I always ask all teens 2 questions on their well visits. Every well visit. The first question is, what's the number 1 drug that gets you suspended or kicked out of school? And the answer is...
Mojo?
That's what they say. So the most common guess is marijuana.
Yes.
Great guess. And it's illegal. It's addictive. Studies show that regular use in under 25 can change the way your MRI looks. And so really structural changes and loss of IQ points and increased psychosis. I make the point that since their brain is growing, they're more liable to it. And if mom and I were high every day, which I tell them we're not, but if we were, it wouldn't have the possible long-term effects that it could have on them. And it's in liquid form, vape form, candy form, edible form. Marijuana now is way different. It's a whole nother drug than it was in the 70s and 80s. It's 5 times more potent. That people who use it long-term, they're going to meet potheads, and a lot of them basically don't socialize that much. They scrape through school. They end up living with their mom. But then I say, you're wrong. It's number 2, and tobacco's number 3, and the number 1 is alcohol.
Wow.
They never think alcohol because it's a drug.
Right.
It's addictive, and you can get withdrawal from it, and by far number 1. If they get caught with alcohol, a school-related incident, it's awful. They get kicked out of school, but if not that, they'll at least get suspended. And the school has to put in writing to every college that they had an alcohol-related incident. And most of the time, it's the first time that they do it, they get caught. Every school. You name a school. Just about every year. You see that, right?
Yeah.
They get with alcohol. And it's obviously endangering with driving. So the second question I asked is, what's the number 1 way that teenagers die around here? Matt?
It is car accidents.
Exactly. So drunk driving, they guess, texting with driving, drug overdoses, suicide, which is actually the one that's rising the fastest and is associated with having a gun in your house. But the answer by far is car crashes. And so they should never get in the car with anybody that their parents know about. They should wear your seatbelt. Backseat's safest, even though they're old enough to be the front seat. And then again, I say that if you're ever in the car and you don't feel safe, or the guy you're driving with, maybe you're on a date, it's creeping you out, just go like this and pretend to throw up, or really throw up. Nobody wants you to throw up in their car, especially a teenage guy. And they'll always stop the car. And then you run out of the car and you call home. So those are my 2.
That vomiting thing was nice too.
I really like that part. They like it, really, yeah. But you can't overdo the vomiting thing. If you do that every time, then people go, oh yeah, she's just trying to vomit again. But
what does it mean if somebody gets into your car and says, hey, did somebody throw up in here? That's a completely different story.
Okay, we'll be right back. And now we are back.
Strep pyogenes pharyngeal infection can be associated with mild signs also. And so because of this, and turn up your podcasts, you medical aid units out there, a diagnosis on a clinical grounds only is unreliable. Let me say that again. Diagnosis on clinical grounds, meaning I just looked and gosh, their throat was red or they have the other symptoms, is unreliable and as far as I'm concerned, unconscionable.
So any doc who says that he can guarantee 100% that a certain patient has strep by looking at it or smelling it, whatever, without getting culture, is an idiot.
Yeah. Yeah, or at least operating in a different dimension than we are. So, exudative pharyngitis. There you go. Exudative pharyngitis, meaning pussy sore throat, is uncommon in children younger than 3 years old. Although strep pyogenes infection can occur in this age group, but it presents usually pretty differently, almost in a really kind of sickly sense. They usually come in with fever, they come in with swollen glands, and they really tend to be really snotty and sick looking.
I don't culture much under 3, and especially under 2. But there are exceptions when the other family members have it and the timing and such. I do kind of in my head think that any doc who routinely gets throat cultures on infants shouldn't be seeing kids.
Right. No, we definitely do it, but it's usually in situations just like this where the kid just looks kind of stinky sick. I mean, not sick enough to send him over to the ER, but just really pretty crummy. So strep, as we've mentioned now a couple times, is really unusual in kids who are under 3 years old. But why is that?
I'm going to say they probably don't have receptors.
Bingo!
It's always the answer.
Yeah. So they certainly are exposed to strep because they live in families where strep obviously is kicking around from time to time. But the strep doesn't, what was that line that Nicolas Cage used in Raising Arizona? Could not find purchase on my soil or her soil or something like that. Yeah, when he's talking about their lack of children. So strep's there, it just can't kind of lock in.
Also, now the time for giving you that 5th other cause of exudative pharyngitis.
Ooh.
And thank you to Question of the Week, Dr. Stockman and Julie Kim. It's called Fusibacterium Necrophorum.
Yeah.
It's associated classically with something called Lemare syndrome, where you get this dangerous septic thrombophlebitis of your internal jugular vein. But this bug seems to be rising in incidence in recent years. Sometimes it's seen with mono, and it is a cause of strep culture negative exudative pharyngitis, and it responds to antibiotics. So it's this conundrum, which when I heard about this, I was thinking, over the years, I've had kids come in with nasty-looking throats who didn't have mono, who had a negative strep test. And this is one of those areas where we're going against the existing evidence-based medicine, but there are those exceptions where I'll treat with antibiotic, even though the culture's negative.
Yes. I just had one of these a couple of weeks ago, and it's another one of those, like, yes, I'll do this once every several years or so, just because it goes so distinctly against the way we were trained. But there are a few rare bacterium out there that time resolve on their own, but also in most cases will respond to an antibiotic. Now, what I want to make abundantly clear here is that by no means does this give license to anybody who routinely looks at a sore throat and says, oh, let's put you on an antibiotic because you have a sore throat. This is abysmal as it comes to being a good steward of antibiotics. And we'll talk about antibiotic stewardships in the future, but if you don't take care of the things that you have, then those nasty things that we treat with them are going to come back and bite us.
Amen.
Amen. All right, so moving on. Scarlet fever. This is a sexy one, scarlet fever. So scarlet fever, which is strep pharyngitis associated with a characteristic rash, has been noted for hundreds of years. Scarlatina was known to be a unique rash among the febrile rash illnesses, such as measles in particular, by Sydenham in the 1600s. Did I pronounce his name right?
Sydenham? Yeah, I think so.
Sydenham? That name's always confused me.
He's dead. He really can.
That's right.
Say anything about it.
Thomas Sydenham.
Korea?
No, you're supposed to say dead.
Oh.
Come on, you're supposed to play this game with me.
Sorry.
It's a game my brother and I play. There was a time, let me rather say that, when rashes and illnesses were named by numbers. And so this is kind of classically known to most of us who are trained medically, that there were first disease, second disease, third disease, fourth disease, fifth disease, which most people are familiar with, and probably the only lingering lexicon of this era, and now sixth disease. And so, Rob, help me out here. First disease is...
All right, I looked this up already.
I knew you would. Yeah, that's okay.
And I love these six, this classic. I love medical history, and these six always come up like in medical college bowls or the Maconian Cup. So number one, measles.
Yes. And number two, our current topic of conversation, scarlet fever. Number three?
The rubella umbrella. German measles.
Rubella. Bella.
The Rihanna's rubella.
Yes, exactly right. Number four is a disease that really at this point is determined not to be a disease. So it's called Duke's disease. Duke's disease, there were never any pictures of this. It was described in a lot of literature back in the day. And there was even an article published a little while ago that insisted that Duke's disease was actually toxic staph syndrome.
Right, staph scalded skin syndrome with that Nikolsky sign where the skin...
Oh, I was going to quiz you on the Nikolsky sign.
Did you ever get a patient with that?
I have, yeah.
It was freaky.
It's very distinct, and you wouldn't miss it in the world once you've seen it.
The skin peels off.
But Duke's disease has now been determined actually not to exist. And the reason that people have slammed the person who thought it was toxic shock and their published paper is because all these other rashes look kind of similar, but none of them do your skin slough right off of you. And this wasn't described. So the fifth one is...
erythema infectiosum, fifth disease.
AKA fifth disease, yes. And so we see this off a lot. Fifth disease is also known as...
Parvovirus
B19. Yep. And classically described as slapped cheeks disease, which is the way it almost inevitably presents itself. Usually a benign type of an infection in children, although every once in a while it rears its ugly head in pregnant women.
Exactly. So if you have someone with parvovirus, you got to say, is anybody pregnant around there?
That's exactly right.
Talk to your OBGYN. The other thing about this one, when I did a dermatology rotation, is when you have fifth disease, it very much can be affected by sun exposure. So after the red cheeks go away, you get this lacy rash in your arms.
Yes.
And it can last for weeks, come back, go away. Every time the kid goes outside in the sun, it comes back again. So I like to warn the family about that so they don't think that something is going on. It's just a rash. The kid's fine. But just to say, you know what, if you're outside in the sun, don't be surprised if the rash lingers.
And then number 6 is roseola. So roseola, depending on how you think about this, a lot of us think about it as having a classic presentation of multiple days of relatively high fever with nothing else, and then suddenly, as the fever breaks, out comes this rash. And that is known by not just us, but by suburban moms, at least, as being called roseola. Now, roseola was determined to be caused by herpes virus, I think number 6. Is that right, Rob? Or
HHV6.
Yeah. Although I still use the term kind of broadly in terms of colloquially in the community, it's known as any virus that causes high fevers and then breaks out in a rash.
Which a lot of viruses do that.
Exactly.
And I don't usually like to say to the parents human herpes virus 6 because they hear the word herpes and they're upset.
I never do, and I can't prove it. So that was just how it was classically described.
Right.
So anyway, viruses that cause high fevers and nothing else, and then suddenly a rash breaks out when the fever breaks. Most people will call that roseola. So getting back to scarlet fever, there were epidemics of scarlet fever in Europe and in North America with actually high mortality rates as late as the last part of the 1800s. So getting back to Sydenham, who is also known as the father of English medicine and the English Hippocrates. He attended Oxford and in 1648 graduated as a Bachelor of Medicine, and at about the same time he was elected a Fellow of the All Souls College, and it wasn't until almost 30 years later in 1676 that he graduated with an MD. Is that how it went for you, Rob? Actually, you were one of those smart kids. You did the 6-year thing. It took some of us the usual 8 to 9 years to do this. You did the 6-year thing. Yeah.
I was 23 when I got my MD. I was kind of the Doogie
I can
Dr.
see
Doogie
that.
Howser of my day.
Did your classmates beat you up?
Yes. Yes. That's why I'm anxious.
That doesn't surprise me either. All right. So, as I read a bit about the renowned Dr. Sydenham, I discovered some great advice that he once gave to Sir Richard Blackmore. And this is not Richie Blackmore of Deep Purple. Yeah. You know that tune, right? Yeah.
It's probably pretty easy to do in the guitar.
Every college freshman boy with a guitar will play that over and over again, much to the chagrin of his girlfriend at the time.
I think Eleanor Rigby is the other easy one on the guitar. Three notes.
Yeah. I don't know much about Deep Purple, but I think they are in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, class of 2016. Yep.
You know something about them.
Well, I know just a little bit. But anyway, getting back to Sir Blackmore, when he first engaged in the study of medicine, he asked Dr. Sydenham what authors he should read to broaden his medical horizons or his general education. And he was directed by Dr. Sydenham to read, one of my personal favorites, Don Quixote. What a classic. I found myself restarting and restarting this book so many times, I finally just got it on Audible, and it was just marvelous, absolutely marvelous. It was a good 30-some hours, but fantastic. So anybody who has a spare 30 hours to listen to something on their commute, Don Quixote is the way to go.
Never read it.
It's a very good book. I read it still. In 1679, Sydenham gave whooping cough the name pertussis, meaning a violent cough of any type. And Dr. Sydenham was really an interesting guy. He was a raging Puritan. He rejected on religious grounds attempts such as pathological anatomy and microscopic analysis to uncover the hidden causes of diseases. He argued that God only gave man the ability to perceive the outer nature of things with his senses.
Sounds like he would have been close buddies with Dr. Meggs, who didn't believe in washing his hands.
Yes.
And, I had a case of pertussis last week, of whooping cough, and I've had 2 so far.
Wow.
This year.
And
you
usually have a couple a year.
It's always like, this kid had a history of asthma, he's been coughing, I didn't think of it. So who made the diagnosis? My nurse practitioner.
Nice.
Queen K.
Yeah.
She made the diagnosis, and, the hardest part of the whole thing was I had to take a Z-Pack. And it always kills my stomach. It's I got to take a Z-Pack again.
Yikes.
But by the time you make diagnosis, the kid's almost better.
Right.
School was coming out, so we didn't have to worry about that.
It keeps them from spreading it, right? So although Dr. Sydenham felt that pathology and the use of microscopes were against God's rules, this is kind of interesting. Apparently, he thought quite highly of narcotics. So another quote I stumbled across his was, "Of all the remedies it has pleased the Almighty God to give man to relieve his suffering, none is so universal and so efficacious as opium." Dude liked his opium.
He'd be buddies with Dr. Meggs, and he'd probably be working for Big Pharma.
That's right.
And if he was around now, he'd be like, a consultant for OxyContin producers.
Yeah. Sydenham was no slouch. He also, among his many achievements, was the discovery of a disease called Sydenham's chorea, which is also known as St. Vitus's dance.
All right, pause for a Brandywine Valley connection with fine art. So, Sydenham's chorea, famous artist who had Sydenham's chorea is Andy Warhol.
Ooh.
I like Andy Warhol. No, Andy Warhol got it at age 8, and he got high-dose steroids, which I guess was something they tried to do back in the day. And he ended up getting severe acne and had a lot of scarring of his face from it. And then the 70s, he was buddies with Jamie Wyeth of the Wyeths of Brandywine Valley. And they made portraits of each other. And Warhol's portrait of Jamie was this beautiful, sleek, very stylized. But the portrait of Andy Warhol was quite shocking. It showed every blemish and every scar of his face. And Andy Warhol was not completely pleased by this. Jamie also did a great portrait of JFK in the 60s that Jackie O loved, but Bobby and Teddy hated, so they never bought it and used it. But he also painted the first woman portrait for Johns Hopkins University. He was only 17 years old. And do you remember the name Helen Taussig?
Yes. Cardiology, right?
Exactly. Yeah. She was an amazing pioneer in cardiology. First woman. He was 17. They were going to get his father, Andrew Wyeth, but he was too expensive. So they got 17-year-old Jamie.
Wow.
He went up to Cape Cod. He saw her intensity, and he made this portrait of her that she looked kind of crazy. Wide-eyed, very intense, but not unlike what a really dedicated physician with kids and cardiology might look like. But they unveiled it. It was in the 60s, and everyone gasps. And Dr. Taussig put it in her attic until she died, pretty much.
Wow.
And he was crushed. Jamie was crushed. And then later on, Hopkins apologized, and it hangs now at Hopkins. And to bring it full circle, this month, the Brandywine Valley Art Museum is having a whole Andrew Wyeth retrospective. So definitely check it out. He's not just Christina's world.
Yeah. Cool.
All right, back to you.
Yeah, we're just going off on one tangent to another here, but that's okay because that's what we do. So Sydenham's chorea results from a childhood infection with Group A Strep in patients with rheumatic fever, but it is rare, and it's usually late in the occurrence. It happens about 6 months after the acute infection, but sometimes is the presenting symptom that helps a physician figure out whether rheumatic fever is a cause of the person's situation. Alternate term used is Saint Vitus dance, which is in reference to Saint Vitus, a Christian saint who was persecuted by Roman emperors and died as a martyr in 303 AD. So St. Vitus is considered to be the patron saint of dancers because with the name is given, St. Vitus's dance is given as a homage to the maniacal dancing.
You mean homage?
Yeah, well, that's a potato, man. I say potato. To the maniacal dancing that historically took place in front of his statue during the Feast of St. Vitus in Germanic and Latvian cultures.
And little known fact, actually, Elaine Bennis's dance from Seinfeld is modeled after St. Vitus's dance. Look it up.
I will say that my boneless chicken dance from weddings is not modeled after St. Vitus's dance. I claim it as my own.
I don't want to see that.
Someday you might, yeah. A major manifestation of acute rheumatic fever, Sydenham's chorea is the result of autoimmune response that occurs following infection by Group A beta hemolytic streptococcus, or our friend Strep pyogenes, that destroys cells in the corpus striatum of the basal ganglia. It's thought that molecular mimicry, and we'll come back to this later when we talk about other side effects of strep, to streptococcal antigens or proteins leads to an autoantibody, meaning my body makes an antibody, being produced against the basal ganglia, and that this is the main mechanism by which the chorea occurs in this condition.
Which is very similar to the theories of those PANDAS, where you get strep and it attacks part of your brain, and which we'll get to a little bit later.
You bet. And studies that look at Sydenham's chorea also have now been used as parallel studies to looking at PANDAS. So as soon as I thought of St. Vitus, I thought of St. Elmo's fire.
So did I.
Yeah, isn't that crazy? Yeah.
Or sad.
Yeah, right? Maybe we can talk about that sometime when we discuss overrated movies that were about nothing. Yeah.
But it was the peak of the Brat Pack. So wait,
the Brat Pack, yep.
Andy McDowell, Ali Sheedy, or Demi Moore? Which would be your top?
Oh, you know what? I was a Demi Moore guy.
Me too.
But why were you a Demi Moore guy? What was the attraction?
I liked her in Ghost.
You know what the attraction was for me was her voice. That kind of a little bit husky, a little smoky. It was my friends and I used to dub it voce erotica, and we'd say things like, "Hey, man."
No, I'd say, let's keep going. I don't want to hear you.
You know what? Who else had a voice like that? Do you remember? Bob Newhart's show?
Carol Merrill, WPLJ, 1970s.
I don't remember that.
Yeah,
one.
You wouldn't know that.
No, I wouldn't know her. Was she out of Syosset Rocks or something?
She was one of the New York rocks.
How about Suzanne Plachette?
Yes.
Yeah, a little Bob
I
Newhart
love Bob
action
Newhart.
there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So back to Dr. Sydenham. So apparently he also remarked that there were cases in his practice where, and I love this. This is beautiful. I have consulted my patient's safety and my own reputation most effectually by doing nothing at all. So you got to like a guy who will look at a situation and say, honestly, the best thing to do here is nothing.
Especially back then when they had nothing to
and
give.
when they had nothing, right?
Except leeches. So
leeches and bleeding and all kinds of crazy stuff.
I agree.
Yeah.
Doing nothing is fine. I kind of have the Seinfeld approach sometimes that, sometimes it's good by doing nothing.
Yeah.
Like Dr. George Costanza.
Nope. I love that. And that's really a plan that we oftentimes take in our practice, and I'm sure you do the exact same thing, is so that we trust that if we tell somebody that I want you to watch out for this, this, and this, that it's safe to just watch the child. Anyway, I digress. So Scarlet Fever, getting back to Scarlet Fever, it's a clinical syndrome that's typified by the presence of a rash along with strep pyogenes infection, usually pharyngitis. And it's called Scarlet Fever because of the red skin rash that accompanies it. In the 1600s, epidemics of scarlet fever spread from Italy and Spain into northern Europe, and in 1736, an outbreak occurred in the American colonies, killing 4,000 people.
Wow.
So Charles Darwin lost 2 of his children to scarlet fever. Scarlet fever also led to the founding of the Rockefeller University by the world's first billionaire and the founder of Standard Oil, John D. Rockefeller. And he founded this because his 3-year-old grandson died of scarlet fever in 1901. And Rockefeller University remains a leader in biomedical research today, including research investigating various aspects of the biology of Group A Strep.
The one thing about it, we'll get into this a little bit later. I mean, to me, these days, scarlet fever is just strep with a rash.
Right.
But so what was killing all these people?
I've got to imagine, and I think this goes, and I've thought about this a lot over the years, but I've got to imagine it was probably rheumatic heart disease that killed these people. And because the scarlet fever had such an overt presentation, it had this rash, as opposed to anything else, people equated the rash with like dying.
Right.
And so that's why still to this day, you say scarlet fever to people and their eyes bug open like, oh my God, how long does he have to live? Yeah.
Right. Or was it some kind of a strep septic shock type of thing? Because it's certainly not, even pre-antibiotic age,
right.
I was surprised by those numbers.
Yeah, I was as well. But and it really makes you think. And I tried to look into it a little bit. I couldn't find the specific reason. Yeah, looking into it meaning Googling, why did scarlet fever kill people?
Yeah. Someone out there is listening maybe thinking they're such idiots because we know exactly
I'm sure there are a lot of people out there thinking that, not because we don't know about strep.
Our friends
that's
colleagues.
Right. So this disease was so common that it was a central part of the popular children's tale, The Velveteen Rabbit. Do you remember that?
Yeah, that's
a tearjerker for sure. What's your favorite children's book?
Favorite, besides the Harry Potter books, which gets older, remember Pat the Bunny?
I remember it.
Are You My Mother by P.D. Eastman?
That was okay.
Okay, Matt. We have different tastes.
My favorite one was The Giving Tree. It still is. In fact, I'll give that to people who are expecting a baby who are close to me. Yeah, that is just such a...
Is that Shel Silverstein?
It is Shel Silverstein.
Yeah, okay, that's a great book.
Yeah. So anyway, so the notorious rash from scarlet fever usually begins on the first...
Wait.
Yes.
And you mentioned Velveteen Rabbit.
Yes.
But did you like Little House on the Prairie? I didn't read the books, but the TV show, Michael Landon... Love that TV show.
That was a good one.
So if you remember, Mary...
I thought the older daughter, Mary, was kind of hot.
Well, and Mary goes blind in the book and in a TV show. I stopped watching it, then I watched it again. I'm like, why is Mary blind?
Right.
But supposedly it was all from scarlet fever, which is not something to think of with scarlet fever becoming blind. And then later on, they looked into it, and the real Mary got blind from a viral meningoencephalitis.
Wow.
Not from scarlet fever.
Well, it's interesting that you bring this up because when I was doing this research, there were a couple of different places where I found that some people thought that Helen Keller, who was actually born being able to see and hear, when she got sick at 19 months and her deafness and her blindness started, a lot of people attributed that to scarlet fever.
Really?
Yeah. Of course, that would go against our theory that under 3 years old, you rarely get strep, right? so I didn't feel compelled to make that a big part of this.
But now you did.
No, I just threw it in there. Yep. All right. So this rash from scarlet fever usually begins on the first or second day of the illness, oftentimes on the trunk, and then it spreads and can involve the extremities and the neck and the face. It doesn't usually occur it doesn't ever occur on the palms or on the soles of the feet. The rash can be more pronounced at the flexure areas, so areas like inside of the elbow, which is called the antecubital fossa, and at the armpits, the axilla, or the groin. And when these areas become hyperpigmented in a kind of an erythematous or a red way, this is known as Pastia's lines. The cheeks can be flushed, and the area around the mouth then appears to be pale or is pale, and that's called circumoral pallor. So all these are signs.
I definitely see that.
Yeah, all these are signs of scarlet fever, and the rash is made up of these tiny little bumps, these papules, that give it the classic sandpaper texture. And so this is something that we have no problem relating to medical students. As soon as they feel it, they get it. That's the sandpaper rash. All right,
You know it when you feel it.
You do know it when you feel it. So, quick sandpaper quiz here, man. I thought I'd go on.
I'm gonna fail the sandpaper quiz.
This is called the tangent episode. If I told you that one sandpaper had a grit of 80 and another had a grit of 220, which one is the finer grit?
I guess the more expensive would be fine, so the higher number. I don't know.
You're right. Okay, that's This Old House stuff. ThisOldHouse.com. Yep, I picked up on that. Do you ever buy sandpaper? Obviously not.
Maybe once at Lowe's.
You're a Lowe's guy?
It's near where I live.
Oh, no way. I think, just like in life, there are like vanilla people and chocolate people. There are Lowe's people and there are Home Depot people.
Well, Home Depot, you can wander around for years and not find someone to help you.
Home Depot is where the manly men hang. And Lowe's is where the people looking for
who wander
chandeliers.
around, have nothing else to do for years because nobody helps you at Home Depot.
I've always been helped at Home Depot. But anyway, all right. So another thing that is a classic presentation of scarlet fever is known as the strawberry tongue. So have you seen these?
I have seen these.
Yeah. So I was always a little bit confused because there are seemingly white strawberry tongues and red strawberry tongues, and so this occurs when the papilla of the tongue, or these little outpoochings of the tongue, it can be seen on a coated tongue where red dots are on a white background, and that later becomes kind of scuffed off or denuded off. In cases of strep, a white membrane through which the papilla can be seen initially cover the tongue, followed by a desquamation of the membrane. And so what becomes a white tongue with little red dots on it oftentimes then becomes a bright red tongue once the white membrane gets denuded.
And what are three classic conditions that give you the strawberry tongue?
Oh, I think I know these. Wait a minute. So you have scarlet fever, or strep. You have Kawasaki's.
Exactly.
And you have, oh man, my brain must be clicking this morning. You have, don't tell me, let me guess, staph scalded skin syndrome.
Bingo.
Yeah.
Or toxic shock.
Toxic shock. Yep.
Which one? But but the Kawasaki's, in Chicago back in the 80s, we were kind of Kawasaki center. We kind of the dream team of Stan Schulman, Ram Yogev, and Ellen Chadwick. So we saw Kawasaki's all the time.
I'll bet.
It was like asthma for us. And I think we saw more strawberry tongues. I used to think Kawasaki's more than strep back in the hospital.
Yeah, that's another future episode right there, Kawasaki. Yeah. Just because I know you're really good at pronouncing Japanese.
And
names.
We still have no idea what caused it.
No, that's really a tricky one.
Scary but cool.
Have you ever seen a blueberry tongue?
No. Oh, no. Blueberry?
Yeah,
no.
Yeah. I like blueberries. Well, you'd like blueberries too. Going back to blueberry.
I do. And when someone comes in and they have a blue tongue, they drank something that was blue. There's no medical thing that gives you a blue tongue. Well, what's your blueberry tongue?
Well,
blueberry muffin spots in Rubella.
Blueberry.
Cutaneous hematopoiesis.
That reminds me of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Do you remember
right.
what the girl's name was?
Verucas.
No, man. You're off.
Veruca
Salt was the daughter of the nut tycoon. It was Violet Beauregard.
Oh, okay. I totally blew that one.
Yeah, Violet Beauregard. In fact, I do remember after she ate the gum that was a whole meal, and she got to the blueberry part, and she started to blow up. Willy Wonka said something like, we're having problems with the dessert. And then he called over the Oompa Loompas and said, would you roll the young lady down to the juicing room, please? I love that movie.
Again, not the Johnny Depp version.
No, Gene Wilder version, not the disturbingly creepy Johnny Depp version, but Roald Dahl, genius. Roald Dahl, also dead.
Okay, that's the end of our part 1 of 2 special strep episodes. And again, sorry for all the rambling. It was a bit extreme, even for us, but our brains do go a bit soft in the summer. We'll be back with strep part 2 and then our season 1 wrap-up show. Have a good day, Matt. Podcast Pediatricians Productions. All rights reserved.